Hey there, darlings. Welcome to the Farmer's Table. My name is Jess, if you are new here. I'm so glad that you're here, and if you're not new here, welcome back. I'm also glad you're here. I'm in my kitchen this late afternoon, and I'm about to start preparing dinner. Today I'm making beef stew. This is a recipe that has a little bit of a story behind it. Oh, let me bring this over here. This cookbook is the book that taught me how to cook. So my ex-husband actually bought me this book a lot of years ago. I think it was Asher's first Christmas, and he's graduating high school this year, to give you a little context. Prior to learning to cook, very hands-on by trying a lot of things, I was very much like a open a box and cans kind of home cook. Pre-packaged meals and things out of the freezer, and that's just the way that we ate. It was just what I knew how to do, and I was doing my very best. I had a really hard time like not going out to restaurants and stuff like that because the food there was so much better than what I was able to make at home. And I got this cookbook and I cooked through it cover to cover. I did every recipe in the book. Hilariously, my ex-husband now loves to give me a very hard time about how he had to put up with the bad cooking. So I always make him good meals whenever he comes around for the boys, just to, you know, make up for all of that terrible boiled plain chicken that I made for him all those years ago. But this cookbook is actually very dear to me because I feel like it was something of a teacher for me. This is called Mad Hungry Feeding Men and Boys by Lucinda Scala Quinn. As you can see, my copy is very, very loved. It has got all kinds of marks and stains inside. And this is the book that I learned to make beef stew from. I don't ever pull this book out anymore when I'm making beef stew. This is not a recipe I really have to reference anymore. And I'm going to take you through it today, how I do it. It's roundabout. I don't measure anything. But these are the pages that originally brought this recipe into my repertoire, and it is something we've enjoyed a lot since then. This is a little time consuming. Not only does it take a while to like brown all of the meat and chop everything, it also takes a while to cook, because for this to really get the nice lovely consistency and melded flavors, you want to let it simmer for at least a couple of hours. So this is something I always start kind of in the middle of the afternoon, and usually when I make this, sometimes I will make twice as much as I am today. Sometimes I'll make a whole lot and we'll eat on it for like a week, just because if I'm going to cook it, I want, you know, to make a lot and enjoy it, because it doesn't make it take that much longer to double the recipe. Today I'm not making an insane amount. Oh, I do need to point this out. I've been working on my kitchen. I painted these kitchen cabinets. I haven't made it over to the other side of the kitchen. My logic was I'll do this side entirely first since I film videos, but here I am turning the camera around. I'm not good at aesthetic. It's not my thing. But I will give you honest advice. I wasn't trying to make a cooking show. I'm just trying to make dinner. You need a big pot, preferably heavy bottom. This is a great recipe to employ a Dutch oven with if you got a cast iron Dutch oven. But you can use like another heavy bottom pot if that's what you've got. I actually don't know that I have everything that this recipe typically calls for. I will type this out and put it in like a printable link in the description, as well as a link to that cookbook. I do highly recommend that cookbook. It's really good. She also just gives a lot of information about like getting started with the scratch kitchen. As I said, it helped me a lot, and I still reference it. Had this beef thawed out, and I didn't know for sure what I was going to do with it. It was kind of a toss-up. I was thinking about potentially making stroganoff, and Asher actually mentioned last night that he really likes beef stew, so I thought, well, might as well. The weather's changed. It's definitely soup and stew weather. So for this today, I'm using these ranch steaks, or flat iron steaks. This is like the top part of a sirloin. You can use a lot of different kinds of beef for this because it's going to be cooked low and slow. You can use cuts of beef that really need some time cooking to tenderize, like roasts and things like that. A lot of times whenever I will see like a chuck roast on sale or something like that, I'll grab it to make beef stew out of. You can use like more expensive steaks, but considering the fact that you're going to cook them low and slow, the tenderness of those is a little lost in this recipe, so I don't think it's fully necessary to do that by any means. Cheap cuts of beef work well for this because of the cook time. And we're gonna cut about 4 pounds of meat if you're going by the recipe. As I said, a lot of times I'll double it. Today I'm doing more or less about 4 pounds. I don't know exactly how much this is. I didn't weigh it. Into bite-sized pieces. So this morning I actually had an older video pop up, actually from this channel, from when I early on had started it, and it was what I had called like a cook with me video, where I was just cooking and chatting. And I watched it back. Sometimes it's like anything that you're working on as a content creator, you can be kind of critical of your own work. And sometimes when I watch videos back a year or 2 years after the fact, or even longer, I don't know, I just see them with like fresh eyes, maybe from the outside perspective. It really struck me, and what I've been thinking about since then is I really want to do more of that. I want to turn the camera on and chat with you guys while I cook dinner. I am in a point in my life right now that I am trying to look at all of the things that I want to do that I'm overcomplicating and simplify them and just do them. I really wanted to do this channel excellently, and multiple times I've shared. I talk myself out of sharing a lot of things because I'm not trying to make a cooking show. I'm just trying to make dinner, and things are so imperfect, and I don't have measurements, or the house is loud, or the kitchen's a mess. I can recognize from taking a step back and looking at it, that stuff really doesn't matter. In fact, many of you, your house is probably loud. You may not have all of the exact ingredients needed for a recipe. Your kitchen may be a mess, but you still have to make dinner. And I want to be able to kind of come alongside you in that. This is something, you know, I make public pledges of things that helps me. I know you guys don't need it, but I need it. I'm going to start posting more on this channel, the imperfect stuff. I think it is a dang shame in our culture that more people do not learn to cook in homes where it's just normal to get dinner on the table, nourishing dinner made from whole foods, because life is so busy. We end up turning to conveniences. Actually cooking food for your family, for yourself, gets blown into this paramount thing that we think it's so much harder than it actually is. And then I think that's kind of reiterated when anytime you reach out for knowledge or support, you find a lot of perfectly thought out aesthetics, and you find pictures of kitchens that look nothing like yours. Meals that are being made that your family would never eat, you know, recipes that include ingredients that nobody readily buys. And the thing is, I think that is a dang shame, because when food prices are becoming increasingly more and more expensive, when ingredient lists are becoming increasingly more and more sketchy, you don't know what the right way to eat is, and you don't know what the right thing to buy is, and it's just all together a completely overwhelming experience. What we really need more than anything else is, you know, this. Friendly conversations over real meals, cooked with care, imperfectly. Like, I want to show you eating seasonal and cooking from scratch, but I definitely still use store-bought ingredients. We grow a lot of our food, but we don't grow all of it. It's important to me for things to be organic, but sometimes it's not feasible. And while I want to make food for my family that's nourishing and supports their health, I'm definitely not black and white in that. I still use sugar and still do things. I just try to keep them in actual moderation. You know, people say moderation a lot, but then when you don't know what ingredient labels actually mean and things like that, it's very hard to do that. So I'm just trying to find my way like everybody else, you know. I mean, I'm on a journey and I'm on a process, and even going back to videos that I made 6 or 7 years ago over on Roots and Refuge, you know, there are things that I cooked then that I wouldn't necessarily cook the same way now. It's all about growth. But, you know, when I open this cookbook and see these early stains from when I was very first starting to cook, I mean, that's been, like I said, it's been 17 years ago now that I really started taking it very seriously to take control of my family's food. When I think about where I was then versus where I am now, obviously there's massive growth, and it didn't happen overnight. It took 17 years to get there. And when I think about the areas where I still would like to be better and more disciplined, or that I'd just like to be okay with not being better and not being disciplined, it's a journey. And especially with like this format, I know some people are going to be like, just get to the point. Get to the recipe. There's a billion shorts out there. I'm never going to make them. I'm way too long-winded for that. I like thorough explanations. I am a teacher at heart. I will put links to printable recipes when I have them, and sometimes I don't. I really want it to feel like you're pulling up a chair at the table with your friend and chatting, you know. And maybe you're not going to make beef stew tonight. That's completely okay. Maybe you're making whatever it is you're making. But if you can turn a video on and have somebody hanging out with you, I know that definitely helps me get things done. And I would love to offer that to you. This didn't feel like a ton of meat when I started, but it's really feeling like it now. Okay, so once you get your meat all chopped, what I usually do is lay it out flat on the cutting board, and then I amply salt and pepper this. Just nothing else, just salt and pepper on the meat. If you wanted to, you could season it in other ways, but I usually just season the stew. Then we want to heat our pot on the stove and put a layer of oil in the bottom. I use avocado oil for this, or you can use ghee. You just want to do something that has a higher smoke point. And we're over medium-ish heat here. You may have to turn it down a little bit to keep your flour from burning. And you also need a bowl of flour here. Now, this is gluten-free flour. This is the most time-consuming part of this job. And actually, if you're wanting to get dinner on the stove sooner, and I'm going to do this today because my kids came in and distracted me for a minute, so I'm a little later than I like now. Can get a second pan going and have two pans browning at the same time. The only thing is if you do this, you are going to need to deglaze both the pans, but I'll show you that when we get to it. All right, I'll get this one heated. This is popping because I just rinsed it out. All right, now we're going to take these bites of beef and dredge them in the flour and put them in the oil. This is very important. Give them space. You want a single layer, not piled up on top of each other, and you don't want your pieces touching. This is why this takes longer. But we want to brown both sides of all of these pieces of meat. You're not having to cook them. On the medium heat, this is literally maybe 45 seconds to a minute per side. The reason it's time consuming, we're not just dumping them all in. You can dredge multiple at a time though. Now, what this is going to do is create something of a crust. When you make beef stew, obviously it's going to have a lot of broth, and this flour is going to work to thicken that broth. It won't be like super gravy-ish. You could add flour and make it that way if you like a gravier type of beef stew. I like it a little brothier, but this does add so much depth to the flavor of the stew. Let me show y'all what this looks like. Back here, this pan's getting hot. I'm not going to put any in there yet. You want your oil hot before you put any meat in it, or else it'll just soak that oil up and not crisp. Oh, you can brown more than two sides. You can flip these multiple times and get every side of the meat brown. It's just going to add more flavor, but you don't have to. And as I said, whenever you're doing 4 or 5 pounds of beef, and it does get a little time consuming. If bits of the brown flour like stick to the pan, don't worry about it. That's going to add flavor later. All right, a couple minutes later, our pieces look like this. I'm going to take them out and do the next batch. I admittedly usually pull up a stool when I cook this, because as I mentioned, most of the time I'm doubling this and I'm cooking like 8 or 9 pounds of beef, and I use that 14 quart Dutch oven, and I'll tell you what, this takes a good minute, but today won't take me as long. I'm going to do 2 pans and just get through it. You may have to add a little more oil to your pan as you go to make sure that you've got enough that it doesn't stick. Alright, the final batch of meat is in the pan. That took about 20 to 25 minutes, somewhere in there, with both pans going. Now I'm going to chop some onions. So I mentioned I didn't think I had all the ingredients for this. It's celery that I'm missing. So at this point you want to chop. I usually do a couple of onions. What does the actual recipe say? Two onions. And then I usually do about 6 stalks of celery chopped up. I don't have any. I would like to have it. I think that it's a nice addition. But honestly, with real food cooking, this has got beef that's browned in flour and fat. Lovely veggies. It's going to have a rich broth, tomato paste, and it's going to be so warm. It's going to be fine, even though it doesn't have celery. Don't shy away from a recipe because you don't have everything just right. I personally believe that you should cook a recipe 3 times before you decide how you feel about it. Because by the 3rd time, you're going to be making it your own. You're going to adjust the things that you don't like. My onions are sprouting. I really need a root cellar. The harvest just doesn't last as long without it. When the onions sprout, I just cut them, and I usually take the green bit out. It doesn't taste bad, but it sometimes just doesn't taste quite like what I want. And then I also chop the garlic and the carrots at this point. I would typically put onions and celery in together. It's just going to be onions today. And you can go ahead and chop the carrots. Now, I typically use whole carrots. I don't usually peel them. If you are looking to like have a shortcut, you can buy like pre-cut or matchstick carrots. I do like bigger pieces. Like, this is such a hearty soup that I kind of like my carrots, my meat, and my potatoes to be all more or less kind of similar size, but that's preference. You don't have to do it that way. I just find it cooks more uniformly when you do that. All right, last batch of meat coming out. Now this meat is not like thoroughly cooked. It's still quite red inside. Some of the smaller pieces may be cooked all the way through. I'm not trying to cook it thoroughly. I'm really just trying to brown it to add the flavor and the texture. You should have some fat in your pan. You can add just a little bit more if you need it. Now, when you deglaze a pan, you're putting some sort of liquid in to like scrape all the fond, which is the brown bits that are cooked under the pan, and take all of this fat and these bits and mix it into something of a sauce. And we are going to deglaze this pan, but we're going to cook the onions first. If I were to put the wine in first and then the onions would boil, and I really want them to soften. Again, you would typically have celery in with this. I don't today, but maybe you will. All right, we're just going to cook these down for a few minutes to let them sweat it out. Now this second pan I have, I've just turned the heat off of it, and I'll get the red wine and we'll deglaze them both and I'll combine them here in a minute. Well, I started talking. I put the garlic in, but my vent hood was on. I leave it off so I can make videos, but it gets a little smoky in here. Put the garlic in after the onions have been cooking for a few minutes. You don't want to put them in at the same time because garlic burns faster, and when it burns, it gets very bitter. And we're going to give this about another minute to sweat. And then we're going to take about a 1/4 cup or so of red wine to make sure it's hot. I'm going to put a little splash of this in there too. Cheers. And now we want to scrape all of that good flour and flavor off of our pans. Obviously, if you didn't do a second pan for brownie, you don't have this extra step over there. I'm gonna scrape all this up. And now I'm gonna pour this one in to combine them. Now from here, we're going to put a couple tablespoons of tomato paste. I think I always do quite a bit more than the recipe actually calls for. We're going to add our chopped carrots. So this is like probably 7-ish carrots, less if it's large. It's a couple cups of chopped carrots. May even put a little more in there. Yeah, I'm going to add a couple. Those are small. If I'm going to be without celery, I'm not going to go light on the carrots. The carrots are actually one of my favorite parts of this stew because they so take on the rich broth and all the beefy flavor, and they get nice and soft. They're just really lovely. Alright, right, should look something like this. This is the base of your soup that is going to make it so rich. And here you want to throw a few sprigs of fresh garlic, or, you know, I usually probably put close to a tablespoon in here. I was going to add too, if you don't want to do the wine, which I said a 1/4 cup, but probably both. It's probably closer to half. You can deglaze your pan with chicken broth too if you don't keep wine in your house or anything like that. I do think the wine does add a nice layer of flavor. Think Julia Child's Boeuf Bourguignon. That's red wine, you know, Burgundy beef, which is beef and red wine. But this is perfectly fine without it, and I've made it plenty of times without it when I didn't have any red wine to put in. If you are not like a regular wine drinker and you don't always have wine in your house, they make these really small bottles, and they're just like in the wine section of the grocery store, and it's meant to be like 1 cup of wine, but I will keep those like in the back of the pantry for if I don't have an open bottle or something like that, that I can grab one of those if I'm making a recipe that doesn't have it, because I'm not a huge wine drinker, so I don't always have it around, and that way I have the option. You can also open a bottle and split it up into containers and put it in the freezer. It won't freeze solid, and you can grab one of those, you know, if you've got it measured in like 1/2 cup measurements, and then just throw one of those in your stew as well. All right, so we have our cooked veggies, we have our tomato paste, our deglazed pan, our herbs. We're now going to add the meat back into the pan. Make sure if you put it in a bowl that you get all the juice that has accumulated in the bottom, because that is all flavor. Give it a good stir. And now we're going to add 2 quarts of broth, any kind. I typically do beef because that's mostly what I can, but I think today actually this broth is turkey broth and pork broth. I need to do a broth day and like cook a whole bunch and like spend the day canning it, because I'm getting down to the end of what I've got in my pantry. It'll all work. It's fun. I did not mark these because I will tell you what to do, but I will not do it myself. I will say, mark your canning when you're done. That's fine. There was no reason for me to smell it. It's a habit. I don't know. I'll be honest, I've been canning for a long time. I've made a whole lot of food. Still low-key a little concerned I'm going to poison and kill my family. Not actually. Not enough. If I were actually concerned about that, I wouldn't be doing this. I do smell everything that I open out of habit. All right, 8 cups, 2 quarts of broth over here. Now, this is when the magic happens, okay? So we're going to put this on low heat, and we're going to cover it, and we're going to leave it, and it's going to cook for about 2 hours. 30 minutes before done time, so in an hour and a half, I'm going to come and put chopped up potatoes in this. I just cut my potatoes the same as I do everything else. I try to keep the bites relatively uniform, so if you're eating this with a spoon, you can have a bite of carrot, a bite of potatoes, a bite of meat. Don't cook this uncovered. If you need to like cockeye or cover a little bit on top to let the steam out, that's fine, but you don't want this to reduce down a ton. If you need to, you can add a little bit of water or add some more broth if it gets a little more like gravier than you like. But once you cook the potatoes for 30 minutes, this is good to go. It's ready to serve. All right, guys, it is ready. Let me take this off. Here is our beautiful, hearty beef stew, looking amazing. So what I'll do here is spoon this into bowls. This is wonderful with cornbread or some really crusty bread. I know here in South Carolina a lot of people like to cook rice and then serve their beef stew over rice. We don't really do that. It already has potatoes in it, so that's kind of enough for us. But I usually do put a sprinkle of dried parsley on this, just to kind of give it a pop of green. But this is it right now. This smells like home and wintertime and love. As soon as the potatoes are soft, just take a knife and cut into them. As soon as they're soft, this is ready to go. That's really the only thing you're waiting for. If you do cook it a little bit longer, everything just gets more fall apart and lovely. And honestly, the leftovers of this, I think, are way better. Like once it's sat in the fridge overnight and you heat it back up, it's amazing. I hope you guys love this. As mentioned, I'll put a link down below. What do you like to do with your beef stew? What's your special trick? What makes it taste like love to you? Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I bless you. Until next time.